So before we get started, let's have prayer, and then we'll get going. Lord God, thank you for all that you do for us. Lord, thank you for the rain that you sent this spring. We pray that you might send more. As we begin the actual study of the 10 words that we need to really look at, we pray that this Bible study would honor and glorify you, that we might all be able to get something out of it and find it enjoyable. Now as we go out through the rest of this day, we ask that you be with the second service, that everything we do and say might honor and glorify you. For us these things in your precious name. Amen. So, in case you didn't know, this past week was the Texas District of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod Convention in Houston. Okay, so it was Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and I was your voting delegate for the convention. And I have done that more than once. So, but the last time I went was long enough ago that Kevin and I shared a hotel room because he was not married yet. So it's been a while. So, but I was just going to say, if you ever want to go to a worship service that will impress you, go to the worship service associated with the convention because it's incredible. The music is unbelievable. I mean, especially there. Gloria Dei is huge. And so the sanctuary probably seats, I would guess, 1,200 to 1,500 people. I mean, because there were 700 of us, and it wasn't even close to full, really. And so, so it's a bunch of pastors and their wives, and they all sing. And it really makes a difference in how effective the service is. Okay? I won't talk about the sermon, but the singing was incredible. So just the presentation is really good. I mean, if you've never been, it's really good. And the pastor at Gloria Dei, really good, really impressive guy. So that was the best part of the convention. The rest of it is listening to wherefore and whereas and therefore and stuff like that. So you get 2 days of that. And 2 worship services. So we were very well represented there, I thought. So Pastor Kevin is on the nominations committee for the synod. And so he basically goes out and finds the people that are elected to the various offices within the synod. And so that's a pretty big deal. And so he spends a day and a half on the stage, well, not a day and a half, but quite a while on stage, reading the slate and bringing out candidates and everything like that. And so he was reelected to that position for the next, which will be 3 years from now, we'll have the next convention. And he was actually elected by the highest winning percentage of any person that was elected to any office. So, but he knows a lot of people. So you don't realize that until you go there and everybody stops and talks to him. So, but his family is pretty involved in the synod and has been for a long time. And his cousin's a pastor who sat right with us and we talked to him, got to meet him. So really good guy. He's a pastor in West Texas and he serves 2 congregations because in case you didn't know it, there is a shortage of Lutheran pastors in the LCMS. And he serves 2 congregations that are 3 hours apart. And so he has to preach at one Sunday morning and one Sunday evening. And that's all he can do, is just make the 3-hour drive. So I don't remember what they said, but there's a pretty big gap in between pastors we need and pastors we have. And so we're pretty lucky to have gotten Pastor Zach the way we did, because it really is difficult. There's a lot of people that have had, basically fill-in pastors for years because they can't find a permanent pastor. So it's really fortunate that we got him. I was trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, we were really well, I thought, represented there because, of course, the Kieschnicks were there, and Pastor John and Lynn were there, and Kevin and I were there, and Peggy Turnipseed was there because her brother is the 2nd vice president. He moved up a notch. He was 3rd vice president. And if you don't know what that means, in the Texas district and at the national synodical level, you have a president who is basically in charge of your synod, and then you have vice presidents. In Texas, we have 4, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th vice president, and they're ranked like that. And that's the line of succession. So if something happens that the president can't finish his term, vice president number 1 takes over, and vice president number 2 moves up to vice president number 1. And so there's 4 in line of succession that way. You rank them, and that's how they come up with all that stuff. And then they had like the acknowledgement of service, like years of service, and they start out with, I think, 25, but we counted and there were 24 Zion members that were acknowledged for services above that. And like, for instance, Dr. Kluth was 55 years, and Carol was 50, and Susan Winkleman was 30. And so there were a bunch of people like that. And then they had the memorial service where Steve Minke, of course, has passed away, and Bill Winthy were the two from Zion that were memorialized. I think that's about all that happened. President Harrison came and spoke, as he usually does. And, well, we'll leave that there. It starts with a B, and it's about this long. It's like Braunschweiler's or something. I mean, it's and he was the director of mission and ministry for the synod before, and so he's been working at the synod for a number of years. He's not a new face or anything. He's been here. He lives in San Antonio, I believe, and so he will be the new president. Really good guy, seems like. In case you didn't know, Michael Newman was our old president, Reverend Michael Newman. Really an outstanding guy. Mike, I mean, he's going to be really, really hard to beat. He was really, really, really good. So, and we were at Gloria Dei, or your brother, not your brother, it was Ethel Mickens' brother, right? Was the pastor there. John Kieschnick, right? I think for a long time. So, yes? He's a cousin, okay. Oh, yeah, nobody can pronounce it. It's like I said, the new president's name is like 12 letters, and it's mostly vowels. So, anyways. All right, so let's get started. So, 10 words. I see some hands in the back. Yes. Yes, Dr. Kieschnick. Yes, it is. That's right. Browners Reuter. Browners Reuter. Browners Reuter. How many letters? 15 letters. Okay. I said it's a mouthful, but he seems like he's very well spoken. Seems like a really nice guy. So, he is the Reverend Doctor as well. So he should know what he's doing. All right. So here we go. So let's see what I put up here. I don't remember. So the definition of words are important. A commonly agreed upon vocabulary is absolutely necessary for any relevant discussion or debate to take place. Right? If you're going to talk to someone, it helps if you're using the same vocabulary. If you have two different understandings of what a word means and you're trying to discuss something with someone, it makes it very, very difficult. Basically impossible to do. And so that's what we're going to try to do, is define some words that are important. So the same notion can be thought about in mathematical terms, right? When solving an equation, it's crucial that each side of the equation be expressed in like terms. You can't solve for millimeters on one side and inches on the other, right? You do that and bad things happen. I was working on a job where they bought a bunch of equipment from a European supplier, and everything was listed metrically as far as the pressures that could be withstood by some of this equipment. And they thought it was in American inches. And so they shipped it over here, and I watched big pieces of equipment explode. So for 2 weeks while they were trying to figure out what they had done wrong. Well, they ordered it based on American. Yes? Yes, a rocket ship. But, right. So that's what we're talking about here. If we're going to define terms, we're going to talk about certain things that are important, you have to be talking about the same thing. You can't be talking about... It's interesting, you think about it, there are some, like Robin was talking about last week, there are some societies or some languages that don't have words for certain things that you need to express. And so you have to explain it different ways. I would be horrible at that. So, do we recognize this guy? Okay, so you need to look no further than the Clinton Lewinsky scandal to see how important and often misconstrued definitions of even the simplest terms can become. Does anybody remember what he was defining? Is. It depends on what the definition of the word is. All right? Let's see if he can talk here.
With Ms. Lewinsky, the statement that there was no sex of any kind, in any manner, shape, or form with President Clinton was an utterly false statement. Is that correct?
It depends upon what the meaning of the word is.
Yes.
And so that got played. There was not Facebook or anything like that back then, I can assure you, because that was 95 probably when that happened? Something like that? Because, huh? I was telling people before Sunday school, I remember the night he was elected because I was sitting in a hospital in Huntsville, Texas, watching an inmate take his final breath when they announced that he had won, and I was completely flabbergasted. I mean, I assumed Bush was going to win easily. I'm from Texas, you know, so we wouldn't elect anybody from Arkansas ever, but that's just a whole other thing. So how do we define truth? Anybody want to take a shot? What is truth? So a conclusion based on fact, right?
Jesus said, "My word is truth."
Jesus said, "My word is truth." And it is, right? We trust that what Jesus says is true, right? Okay, so let's see. Historical definition: that which accords with factual, objective reality. You can look at it, you can prove it, right? There's no question about what you're talking about is real. You can look at it, you can prove it. So the modern definition is an internal, personal, and subjective sense of reality that exists only in the mind or a social construct created to advantage the dominant group. Does that sound like the world we're living in? It does, right? So, like I said, I have 3 kids who are in their 20s, and that's the reality they live in, right? That it's okay, you can believe whatever you want to, really is kind of the I guess their mantra, if you will, you know? So, how does the redefinition of truth differ from the historical version? What's the difference? It's not true. Okay, that's good. The modern definition of truth is not true, and that's correct, really, right? But Jeff?
The modern definition is subject to change.
It is, depending on whose truth it is, right? It's subject to change because what's true for me may not be true for you. So that's really difficult, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit more. So in what ways have you seen or experienced the redefinition of truth? How have we seen this in our world? How have we seen truth redefined? All over the news, right? It's just like Robin last week had those 2 examples of headlines that were about the exact same story but gave a completely different representation. Huh?
You want to just talk to this?
I can. Yeah, that thing's annoying me.
That'd be easier.
Oh, let's see.
We need a piece of tape.
Can we? Yeah, I can hear that. Okay. You can maybe let people talk on that
Yeah.
if they want to. All right, can we hear me? I think we can. All right. Well, I was saying now. Oh, yeah, the headlines that Robin had last week about the exact same story, completely different meanings, right? Not even close to the same thing. And that happens a lot. And so I go to meetings all the time at work, and, you know, jobs are always behind, okay? Nothing's ever ahead. And the reason that it's always behind is somebody else's fault every time, right? And so the truth is something, and so I've gotten this reputation, believe it or not, in my circles in Austin, Texas, of being the guy that will go, "That's a lie," in the meeting. And people don't like it whenever you tell them they're lying in front of other people, but they still need to be told. And so if you can prove it and they're lying, sometimes you got to stand up and say, "You're lying." So it's not fun. Anyways. So what are some of the social and cultural changes that the redefinition of truth has brought about? What kind of changes have resulted in policies and laws? What laws have we seen that have maybe redefined what truth is? Anybody? Okay, in the back. Roy.
The law about gay marriage.
Okay, gay marriage. Okay, what else? There's a bunch of stuff in the news right now that we can talk about for sure. Terry? The transgender right issues. Should transgender athletes, especially men who are converting into women, be allowed to participate in women's sports? And of course, the obvious answer is, well, no. But people don't seem to be able to get that, and that's one of those things too. Where my kids, I can see where they would say, well, they should be able to do whatever they want to, but it's affecting someone else. It's not like it's just affecting them. It is affecting someone else. What else? Is there something else? Pardon me? Men can have babies. Right? I mean, there's just all kinds of stuff that and it's mostly like sex related that we're talking about here, right? And so, not the next week, but the week after, we're going to do. So I saw that one of my subjects was going to be sex, and I'm like, oh, great. What's this going to be? And it's going to be about sex, male versus female, and why there's only two and not an infinite number of possible choices. Bill?
Sometimes just the word itself that you're defining, the word is a lie. Transgender is a lie.
Right. Right. Transgender is a lie. Right. Right. Well, and I also think so. So this past week, there was a guy named Jonathan Joss who was killed in San Antonio. His neighbor killed him. And he was an actor for the show King of the Hill, that animated television program. He was John Redcorn, the Indian. Okay? And he was homosexual. And he was married to a guy living in San Antonio, and he and his neighbor got in a fight, and his neighbor shot him, killed him dead. And so initially there was all this outcry that it was a hate crime because he was homosexual, right? Well, the San Antonio Police Department goes, no, this is not a hate crime. This guy was a nut. And so, but you look at all the police records, and the police had been called out like 25 times for disputes between him and his neighbor just over property and stuff like that. And so it was not a hate crime at all, but immediately, because the man was a homosexual, you hear hate crime as soon as something happens to him, right? And that's not always correct. That's not always correct. It's not always true. So that's something, I'm not a big fan of hate crime by definition, because I don't think I can prove intent 100% most of the time. It's not, if you commit a crime, it's a crime. Why you did it, I don't care. It's a crime. So why is our understanding of truth important? Why is it important? Because it establishes the basis for our life, right? So what does that symbol up there on the screen make you think of? Justice, right? Justice. Without truth, how much justice can you have? Right? Zero justice, right? So lawyers, is that what you said, lawyer? Yeah, how many, so you say that lawyers, but how many legal arguments have we seen that have really turned the tide of what makes sense? You see stuff that goes on, and I'm sorry, but O.J. Simpson's guilty. He killed those people, okay? But his defense team argued really about the police officer was probably a racist, but that doesn't mean he planted the evidence. And that was really, if you remember all that stuff, I never will forget. So Saturday Night Live, not a big fan, but Norm Macdonald, I loved him. And so whenever O.J. Simpson was acquitted, he said, well, it's official. Murder is legal in California. Anyways, that was a great show. Dr. Sproul. So we have like 4 short videos to watch, so this one's good.
And I've often said, if we were to have the opportunity to ask Jesus to boil down the essence of the faith that he delivered to his church, and asked him to give us the top priorities of our behavior. Jesus, what should we do more than anything else? What should we be concerned about? I wonder what Jesus would say. Well, we don't know, because he never said that this is the one thing that it all comes down to. But the next best thing would be to have the brother of Jesus come to us, and we say to the brother of Jesus, what's the most significant thing that we should be doing as believers to be pleasing God? And of course, the answer that James gives to that question is extraordinary. Few people guess it, but at the end of his epistle, after he's given all these exhortations and all these admonitions, he says, and above all, let your yea be yea and your nay be nay. And then he says, the essence of true religion is the care of widows and orphans. Do you see how practical James is in his concern and in his orientation? Who would imagine that any apostle would say that above all, first and foremost, let your yea be yea and your nay be nay? And yet, it's reminiscent not only of what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount, but it's reminiscent of his words before Pontius Pilate when Pilate asked him if he was a king. And Jesus dodged that question and say, for this purpose I came into the world to bear witness to the truth. Because to the Jew of the Old Testament, speaking the truth included keeping your word. In fact, the thing that makes God so truthful is not only that what he says agrees with reality and corresponds to real states of affairs, but when God says yes, he means yes. And when God says no, he means no. And that when God makes a promise, he keeps it. When God makes a covenant, he fulfills it. And so it's not really surprising when we analyze how central it is to the sinful life of the breaking of promises and of the violation of our words that we find the manifestation of sin. And then it shouldn't surprise us that he says, above all, we are to be people of truth, people whose word can be trusted, people who are keepers of the covenant we have with God, rather than breakers of it. Or, as James says, to be doers of the word and not hearers only.
Okay. So how important is it to be truthful in what we do? It's of top importance, right? There's nothing more important than being truthful in the way we comport ourselves, the things that we do. If you say you're going to do something, do it. You know what I mean? If you say that, be able to prove whatever you want to put forth, be sure that what you're saying is true. And that's not always easy. It's easy to get off into aggrandizing things, if you will, just a little bit better than what it really is. I did just a little bit more than what I said I did, kind of a thing, that kind of stuff. So from the text, there is only one known source of information, and that is a mind. But whose mind? Not ours. We discovered the DNA molecule. We didn't create it. Okay? That's a very, very important distinction. So whose mind is the source of truth? God's mind, right? Only God's mind is 100% the source of truth. If God does it or God says it, it's true. That's a tenet of our faith that you cannot argue against. Okay? If God does it, if God says it, it is true. That is just accepted. Okay? So what does this tell us about our role in constructing anything, including the truth? We need to go back to the source, to God, right? If you want to know what's true, how do you figure out what's true? What would Jesus do? Or what did God do? What does the Bible say? Right? Right? Now, there's some things that you can't discern, and we'll get to that in a second here, I think. So, science is a process by which we make discoveries, and science itself rests on two foundational assumptions. One, the universe is intelligible and orderly, predictable and governed by unchanging laws, right? That has to be true. If it's not true, we live in great uncertainty, right? Who knows what's going to happen next? How are things going to fly off the rail? And we have no way of predicting it, right? You think about it. we go out, I go to bed every night expecting the sun to come up in the morning, right? And we all do that. If the sun doesn't come up, something bad has happened overnight. And so we don't want to wake up with the sun not coming up. So, I went past it, sorry. The second is, humans are set apart from the rest of the physical world in their capacity for critical thought and the ability to discern truth, right? We should be able to think critically and, based upon the facts, determine what is true and what is false, right? We have been given that gift by God, right? I can talk to my dog all day long, and his ability to discern things is very, very limited. Very limited. He is pretty smart, though, because he saw me packing my suitcase to go to Houston for several days, and he knew I was leaving, so he got kind of, believe it or not, depressed. I think he loves me because he wanted to come sit in my lap all afternoon. Well, he never wants to do that. So, God's revelation comes to us in three ways. The book of God's Word, the Bible, the book of God's world, creation, and the book of human reason, the internal witness of men with the law written on their hearts. Okay? Those are the three tools by which we can discern truth. All right? Those are the three things we can use. And really, honestly, all three will be in agreement when something is true. Okay? They're all three going to be in agreement. So, it's crucial we understand that words spoken by God have true objective meanings, and we redefine them at our peril. Right? God means what He says. He wrote it down for us so we would have the ability to objectively look at God's Word. Whenever we start redefining things outside of the biblical definition, trouble awaits, right? Difficulty awaits. How often do we do that, though? So what is the chief law? Right? The chief law of man. What is the chief law? Number one. It was in the sermon this morning. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, right? What's number two? Love your neighbor as yourself, right? When we get outside those two things, trouble starts, right? And so it's really hard to love your neighbor as yourself, right? It's just like, so I went to the convention, and there are people who disagree about things, but they typically do it, they disagree without being disagreeable, okay? And that's something that you have to do as a mature person, is be able to disagree with someone without being disagreeable, You don't hate them just because you don't have the same opinion. And really, if you think about it, even Lutherans who don't believe like we do are probably about 99% the same as us, and there's a very, very, very small sliver that separates us from the same belief. So we should be able to get along to some degree, for the most part. Maybe not perfectly, but for the most part. So, historical evidence has shown that a culture that is built on truth will flourish, right? If you're truthful in the way you do things, your culture will flourish. That should be said, the same thing of families, of businesses, of congregations. If you are dealing with things truthfully and honestly, if you lie about something, you have to remember what the lie was, right? If you tell the truth, it's just simply the truth. And there's no having to think, what did I tell this person the last time I talked to them? If you tell them the truth, you'll know what you told them the last time you talked to them. So this is interesting. I have no idea what this thing actually is, but it says the Transparency International Corruption Perception Index, that's a big thing, reveals that with the exception of Singapore, the countries with the lowest levels of perceived corruption were born out of a Christian framework. Okay? So Christianity in and of itself should lead to people that tell the truth, right? It's basically a basic tenet of our faith. You can't be a Christian and live like you should and not be truthful. It's just that simple. So, without question, truth should be the natural order of things. This being the case, when did mistruth, lies, become a prevalent part of the world? When did that happen? Did God really say that? Right? That was it. The first question right there. So yes, in the garden. So there are certain attributes of God's character that are important to understand, especially in the discussion of truth. So what are some examples of God's character? How do we define God? What do we say about him? All loving? All powerful? Omnipotent? He what? He cannot lie, right? He must tell the truth, right? What else? No evil comes from God. He's omniscient, right? He knows everything. He's omnipresent. He lives everywhere. So you cannot be outside of his presence. That's impossible. The one that I think is the most important where truth is concerned, however, is his immutability, which is really my favorite characteristics of God anyways. He does not change, right? God is the same forever. And if God changed, how could we trust in anything? You know, it's like there's scientific facts in the world, right, that do not change. If God changed, how could we guarantee our salvation? You know, you couldn't if God changed. God has to be the same for us to have anything to base our religion on. He cannot change. So what that means is this, that whenever God says something was true at the beginning of time, guess what? It's true today. It's never changed. It's always the same. Always the same. So I said, 2 plus 2, it's 4. And it's always going to be 4. God cannot make a round square, right? Because he's put laws in motion that prevents that from happening. You know, by definition, you cannot do that. So I think that's interesting. God is all-powerful, can do as he wishes, but he's put certain laws in motion that he obeys or honors just like we do. And it does not change. They are the same now and forever. And that's without that, you couldn't have truth, absolute truth. So if God is the arbiter of truth, who is the father of lies? We've already talked about that, right? Satan. We know that. And that's what his name means, right? He is the father of lies. So you are of your father the devil, and your will is to do your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Not very complimentary, is it? But true, absolutely true. So if Satan is indeed the father of lies, then those who practice dishonesty are working directly in this arena, whether they realize it or not, right? If you're lying, you are practicing what Satan wants you to practice. That's what you're doing. To lie is to imitate Satan himself. This alone should drive right-thinking Christians to be truthful, right? You don't want to be like Satan. You just don't want to do that. So, are there times when lying is justified? Can you give an example of when lying is justified? Santa Claus. Okay. Santa Claus. You don't want to tell your kids that there is no Santa. I guess I can see that.
Does this dress make me look fat?
Well, is there I think that relates directly to intelligence more than anything else. You can be edifying in your speech, right? You can be nice. You don't have to be mean about things, right? So, Colossians 3. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices. And it says, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. That's one of the big 10, right? So, to me, I was thinking about this, and so do you know those TV shows like the murder shows, or like 2020 or Dateline NBC or whatever, right? And they have all these police officers on there who lie to people that they think have committed a crime in order to trick them into some sort of confession or whatever, right? I think that's absolutely wrong. I don't think there's any way in the world that you should be able to do that. I don't like lying. I mean, not like that, to be intentionally deceptive for your own gain, right? What you're talking about for like Santa Claus, you're not gaining anything from that, right? I'm not gaining anything I'm not gaining an advantage over my kids by Santa brought you this. There's nothing for me to gain there. But if you're lying in any way to gain an advantage over someone, it's wrong. You should not do it. I don't like that. That's an example of what I don't like. So, Can you have justice without truth? We've already said no, right? For things to be judged rightly, truth must be involved. If you judge things without truth being important, how are you judging them, right? You have to, well, as it says, rightly divide the word of truth, right? I mean, that's clear. That's exactly what we're talking about. So truth is essential for justice to exist. Justice is based on finding the truth of what actually happened, right? What actually happened. Justice depends on an ultimate source of what is right and wrong. Justice requires laws higher than those humanity can create, right? Really, if we hear about an injustice in the world, we should just inherently realize that's wrong, right? We know what's right. We know what's wrong. Do you ever hear about things taking place that you just know are wrong? You hear them talking and you think, that's just not right. I mean, it happens all the time, right? Like the transgender issues we were talking about. It's just not right, and we know that. And I have 3 daughters that competed in sports, and would I want them competing against a male athlete? Well, no, of course not. You know, I would not. That would be ridiculous. So, okay. Does anybody ever watch Mythbusters? You remember that show whenever it was on, when they did like all the scientific experimentations and everything? So this clip, actually, part of it is at the beginning of most of the episodes, like in the credits that roll at the beginning of the show. So listen to what he says. I think it's really good.
And what about Adam's bold pre-test predictions?
Yes, okay, so I was off with my percentages. I gave what happened here a 30% chance of happening.
20 in fact.
No, 30. 70%, 20%, 10%. No, that wasn't me. That was somebody else.
That was you.
I said 50, 40, 10. 70%, 20%, 10%. I reject your reality and substitute my own.
So there you go. I reject your reality and substitute my own. That is a perfect picture of the world we live in today, in my opinion, right? My reality is what's important to me. Bill. Right. Because society has told us that we need to perpetuate it. Right, the Easter Bunny. I'm okay, so I don't want to talk bad about anyone, so I'm not going to say anything else about that. So anyways, I mean, what you're doing, I mean, I get what you're saying. And when I say talk bad about someone, it's no one in this room. So anyways. All right, so this is really incredible here. Okay, this clip right here, man, I can see the younger generation. I see this all the time. This is really good.
There's been a lot of talk about identity lately, but how far does it go? And is it possible to be wrong? We went to the University of Washington to find out.
Are you aware of the debate happening in Washington State around the ability to access bathrooms, locker rooms, spas based on gender identity and gender expression?
I think people should be able to have access to the facility.
I think bathrooms could and potentially should be gender neutral because there doesn't need to be a classification for differences.
I think people definitely should have the ability to go into whichever locker room they want.
I feel like at least public universities should do their best to accommodate for those who do not have a specific gender identity.
You know, whether you identify as male or female and whether your sex at birth is matching to that, you should be able to utilize the resources.
So if I told you that I was a woman, what would your response be?
Good for you, okay, like, yeah.
Nice to meet you.
I'd be like, what? Really?
I don't have a problem with it.
I'd ask you how you came to that conclusion.
If I told you that I was Chinese, what would your response be?
I mean, I might be a little surprised, but I would say, good for you. Like, yeah, be who you are.
I would maybe think you had some Chinese ancestor.
I would ask you how you similarly came to that conclusion and why you came to that conclusion.
I would have a lot of questions, just because on the outside I would assume that you're a white man.
If I told you that I was 7 years old, what would your response be?
I wouldn't believe that immediately.
I probably wouldn't believe it, but I mean, it wouldn't really bother me that much to go out my way and tell you, no, you're wrong. I'd just be like, oh, okay, he wants to say he's 7 years old.
If you feel 7 at heart, then then so be it. Yeah, good for you.
So if I wanted to enroll in a first grade class, do you think I should be allowed to?
Probably not, I guess. I mean, unless you haven't completed first grade up to this point and for some reason need to do that now.
If that's where you feel like mentally you should be, then I feel like there are communities that would accept you for that.
I would say so long as you're not hindering society and you're not causing harm to other people, I feel like that should be an okay thing.
If I told you I'm 6 feet 5 inches, what would you say?
That I would question.
Why?
Because you're not. No, I don't think you're 6'5".
If you truly believed you're 6'5", I don't think it's harmful. I think it's fine if you believe that. It doesn't matter to me if you think you're taller than you are.
So you'd be willing to tell me I'm wrong?
I wouldn't tell you you're wrong.
No, but I say that I don't think that you are.
I feel like that's not my place as like another human to say someone is wrong or to draw lines or boundaries.
No, I mean, I wouldn't just go like, oh, you're wrong, like that's wrong to believe in it. Because I mean, again, it doesn't really bother me what you want to think about your height or anything.
So I can be a Chinese woman.
You sure.
But I can't be a 6'5" Chinese woman.
Yes.
If you thoroughly debated me or explained why you felt that you were 6'5", I feel like I would be very open to saying that you were 6'5", or Chinese, or a woman.
It shouldn't be hard to tell a 5'9" white guy that he's not a 6'5" Chinese woman. But clearly it is. Why? What does that say about our culture? And what does that say about our ability to answer the questions that actually are difficult?
So, is truth subjective or absolute? Right? Absolute, correct? Truth is absolute. So, I would argue that truth is subjective, but only in very specific circumstances. And what do I mean by that? This is what I mean by that. And it's not, okay. I was born in 1970 at Darnell Army Hospital on Fort Hood, Texas. Okay, I have 3 daughters that are grown, right? They all went to Zion from pre-K through 8th grade. They all attended public school here in Georgetown. 2 of them go to the University of North Texas, or one's graduated, one's still going. Those things are true about me, right? They are true. I can prove them all. But they're objective in the sense that they're true for me. They may not be true for you. Okay? So, I was born on Darnell Army Hospital on Fort Hood, Texas. How many other people were born there? Anybody else in the room? Okay, so that's true for me, but not true for you. So I was also born on July the 8th. Anybody else, July the 8th? Kurt Niebuhr was born July the 8th. And so was Jennifer Jordan, so Cody's mother. So see, that's, if you want to talk about objective truth, those are objective truths, okay? They're true for me, not true for you, but they're still 100% true, okay? So whenever we're talking about objective truth versus static truth or absolute truth, there is objective truth, but you have to define it correctly, okay? It's still true for you. You can look at me and go, yes, that is him. He was born on Fort Hood. Those things are true, but they're not true for you. But that doesn't mean they're not true. They're still true, okay? The stuff that they were just looking at here is an example of untrue objective truth, okay? You know, you can be whatever you want to be. We can't define who you are. But absolutely we can, right? I mean, there are certain things, like he said, can I be a 6'5" Chinese woman? Well, no, you can't, because you're a 5'9" white guy. Okay, those things are not changeable. They're not things that can be negotiated out. You can't be anything you want to be. You know, I didn't decide to be born on Fort Hood, right? I didn't decide who my parents were going to be. I didn't have to deal with any of that stuff. those things were put in place by God, right? God decided that before I was ever born. So those are not the type of things that you can change. You can't change those things. So, we don't create truth, we find it. And we have no power to change it to our taste. Charles Chaput, Roman Catholic Bishop of Philadelphia. He was a Catholic, but he was right. So, right? I mean, we cannot change things to fit our taste. Just because you don't agree with something doesn't mean that it's not true, right? You just, I believe Texas is without a doubt the best place in the world, but there are probably things we could improve on, right? So, were you going to say something, Betty? That is interesting coming from a Catholic bishop, isn't it? Right, because the Pope can define for them what truth is. He can change what was defined many centuries ago by issuing a new edict. So, yes, correct. So, modernism. It preceded postmodernism, and we are living in a postmodernist society now. So, it rejected God, the Bible, and spiritual reality as sources of objective truth. It retained the material universe as a fixed point of reference for truth, right? These things really do exist. We can prove certain things based on the material world that is around us. Then we get to skip past it. Sorry. Postmodernism rejects any notion of universal objective truth. No fixed points exist. Everything is relative. There are no publicly authoritative facts or truth that transcend groups or cultures. What kind of a world is that, right? It's nuts is what it is, because without objective truth, you can prove nothing. You can count on nothing. I go out there and get in my car, and everything is like as it should be. I've got fuel, the battery's charged up. I hit the start button, and it doesn't start. Why? Well, because what was true yesterday is not true today, right? That would be the world we're talking about you living in, something like that, where things go completely off the rails, and there's no way to predict how. That's what that would be like. Bill? Yeah, try to go to the moon with that, right? Right? You don't want to be in space and have the rules change all of a sudden, right? Makes it hard to get back home, kind of a thing. So, there is one thing a professor can be absolutely certain of. Almost every student entering the universities believes or says he believes that truth is relative, right? That's the world in which our younger people live today, a world of relativism. Everything is relative. If you believe that something is okay, it's okay because you believe it's okay. And so we saw that in the interview, right, where the guy was interviewing the kids on the college campus on the University of Washington. That's probably a really good campus to get some really liberal answers from, too. University of Washington. Go to Seattle and walk around, or Tacoma. That's your alma mater? University of Washington? Oh, cool. So they're all crazy up there anyway, she says. So, yeah, I mean, I was in Seattle last year, and yes, it's a crazy place. It really is. So, beautiful, though. It's just a beautiful place, and the climate was really nice. So, that statement was made over 3 decades ago, right? Over 30 years ago. The students described here have long since graduated, moved into the world and workforce, and are holding considerable power in the evolution of thought today, right? Those are the educated people that run the world. And that's what they believe. And you can see it. I mean, it's apparent. It's apparent. So, what happened to common sense? We gave up common sense in the name of relativism. I mean, that's really what has happened, because we don't want to step on anyone's foot. We don't want to seem judgmental. But the simple fact of the matter is you have to be able to judge what is right and what is wrong to correctly exist in the world, right? You have to be able to do that. If you can't do that, then nothing has a point, really, right? No justice, no advancement of society, no right or wrong. Everything is just completely out the window if you don't have a sense of what truth really is. And an objective sense of it, right? The ability to look at a situation and go, this is right, this is wrong, and we're going to do what's right. So it's not always easy to do that, right? And so now, that's what I was talking about when we're talking about hate speech, right? Now, you can say something, simply state a fact, an absolute fact that is scientifically provable, and you'll be accused of hate speech, right? And so that's why you'll be a hater or prejudicial in what you think. And it's just ridiculous, but it happens all the time. So, right. I think that's a big push for like kids. So like my kids, I can see that. So Marianne says people just want to belong and they want to do whatever makes them fit into the group, right? And that's what we do. We really want to, I don't want to offend people. I want everybody to like me. I don't want to go someplace and feel like everybody's looking at me like this guy's a hater or whatever, fine. But I also believe we've got to be true in what we do. We've got to rightly divide what is true and what is not true. So, okay, we live in what can be described as a post-truth culture. Post-truth was selected by the Oxford Dictionaries as the International Word of the Year for 2016 after a 2,000% increase in usage over the previous year. Okay, post-truth. That's where we live, post-truth. How does that sound, post-truth? That doesn't sound like anything you'd want to be a part of, does it? Post-truth. They define the term to mean relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. Man, oh man, that really does describe the world in which we find ourselves, does it not? Objective truth is out the window. It really is. So without shared understanding of what is real, true, good, or evil, there is no center around which different groups can communicate, much less unify. Right? There will be no unity as long as the world is defined like this. You cannot have unity if there is no objective truth. You got to be able to agree on what's right and what's not right. If you can't do that, if everybody's opinion is correct, then you hang out with the people who share your opinion, but the people who don't hang out in their group, and the people who don't have that opinion hang out in a different group. And so there are all these groups that can hang out with each other, but there's no coming together, right? And so that's a bad thing, right? So there is no way to achieve consensus or pursue the common good. Rather, we retreat into identity groups, bubbles, and identity group bubbles, and find it almost impossible to speak to each other, much less agree. Post-truth culture is marked by disunity, distrust, and even hatred. Do we see any of that now in the world? We really do, right? We really do. More so than I've ever seen it. But I can't tell. Whenever I was a kid, it's been long enough ago that news was not instantaneous, right? Something would happen, and it might be several days before you knew it had happened, right? It wasn't like, I can remember whenever I was younger, that I was always a Cowboys fan, right? I was born into the Cowboys. And so the Cowboys would play on Sunday afternoons. Well, Monday, I would go buy the Dallas Morning newspaper and read about the game. Okay, that's just what you did. You looked at the statistics, you see how they graded the offense, how they graded the defense, how they graded the players, and it was in the paper, right? The next day. Today, did I turn it off? I don't think I did. Okay. Today, you can get all those statistics and all the information as it's happening, right? Every time a player rushes and gains a yard, it updates then, immediately, and you can see that, right? And so I used to always listen to the Astros post-game show to get all the statistics and stuff. Now, you can just look online, and it's right there. So that's the world we live in, where you have immediate notification of anything that goes wrong, and so, or anything that they deem as being newsworthy. And that's really a whole story unto itself, is what do we think is newsworthy and what is not. What's reported on, what is not, is a whole different category of what's true and what's not. But, I think in my mind, well, things are terrible, things are terrible, things are terrible. But then I have to wonder, is it because I'm just bombarded with so much more information now than we were whenever I was younger? Or, what is the real root change? Have things changed all that much? Are things worse than they used to be? I don't know, I don't know how to quantify that exactly. So, standpoint epistemology states that a knowledge of truth doesn't come through careful thought, research, reason, logic, or evidence, based on wisdom or experience, but through listening to so-called victims who, based on their lived experience of oppression, have greater insight than oppressors. Victims define what is right and true, and no debate is necessary or possible. Do we see victimology as part of like what we see today, right? So, I was talking about those programs, 2020, Dateline, right? And they're always interviewing the people. And, oh, they were such good people. They were such good people. They were such good people. But they were having an affair with 3 different people, so we don't know which one of those 3 killed them. You know, but they were such good people. You know, I mean, relatively speaking, no, you're not. If you're sleeping around with 3 different people, there's issues there, you know. And sometimes bad things happen to people that do stupid stuff. You know, that's just that simple. Okay? Is it nice? Maybe not, but it's true. Right? And so that's what I'm talking about. We cannot let people who see themselves as victims define our belief system. You cannot do that. You cannot do that. We feel sorry for people that really are victims, and we want to help people that are victims to attain justice, but without a true sense of what is right and what is wrong and what is true, we can't achieve justice. So it's kind of like a catch-22. You're going in a circle. There's no way to correct that. So, 1 Corinthians says, "For who has understood the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. So as we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ. So, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and true." Now that is personally my favorite verse in the entire canon of Scripture right there. Because what does it say? We should be able to determine what's right and what's wrong, right? We should be able to take our mind and look at things and discern truth. You know, it's testing it. The renewing of your mind means you look at things logically and you understand what's happening. It's a logic-based thing. It's not something that's metaphysical or that can't be defined or that's difficult to understand. If you look at Christianity in the lens of truth, it holds up. Okay? It's true. And that's important to understand. So, in the face of a post-truth society, how are Christians called to live? What should our approach be? That's a tough question. Right? What should our approach be? Bill? We're to be a light. So what did Robin say last week? Right, a light that shows the truth of God. What did Robin say? Light and salt, right? Salt and light to the world is what we're supposed to be. You can't see anything without a light, right? And the older I get, the brighter the light needs to be, by the way. I said, my parents, I was always like, you can't read that? What's wrong? Well, I get it, okay? It's just like whenever I get up in the morning and my shoulder's hurting, and I'm like, what did I do? And I didn't do anything. So also, I think about when you say salt, right? So we used to have a house on the coast, and you go down there once a month or whatever to the house, and you get the salt out to salt something, you know, and what is it like? It's on the coast, right? So it's very, very humid. It's a big clump of nothing in the salt shaker, right? And you can't be like that and be effective salt, right? That salt is not good for anything. You can put a chunk of it in there and stir it up, and it might work and it might not. And to me, I see Lutherans very much like that. The clump of salt in the salt shaker that you can't get out, that's not useful, right? As long as we're living right here in Wahlberg and doing our own little Lutheran fun things and enjoying each other's company, which is fine, we're not doing much for the world, though, right? We're living here enjoying ourselves like right where we're at. If you're going to do any good, you got to get out there and be useful in the world. Not always fun, not always easy to do, but if you're clumped up in the salt shaker with a bunch of other salt right here, you're not doing much good. You know, you got to be out there somewhere doing something. So, right. Right, you have to kindly correct. Well, and that comes back to loving your neighbor as yourself, right? You have to do things in a sense of love. And that's not always easy, and I know for a fact that I am very much guilty of not always doing things in a sense of love. Because it annoys me, you get annoyed, you hear stupid stuff, especially when my kids say something stupid. I'm like, why in the world do you think that's correct? Why and thankfully my oldest daughter is, I would say, above average intelligence, and she comes back to me now and goes, you know what, you were right. I get it, I get it. And it's a lot to do with money, like it costs a lot to be liberal. So it does, and you can say whatever you want to, but it does cost a lot financially. Lori. Right. And the problem with that is a lot of families never come to that point, right, where the kids can say, yeah, my dad was right. I get it, And so I look back at my parents, and they did a lot of things wrong. Okay, they did. They were not right about everything. But one thing they did right is every Sunday we went to church. And every Sunday we went to Sunday school. And every Sunday we did the things that you would expect Christians to do, right? And we were not perfect, and we were sinful, and we still are. And my parents were sinful just like everybody else in the world is, but they at least did that, right? And so I think that's important when you look back, that you look back and say, yeah, I bet most people in this room can say the same thing about their parents, right? My parents, and they didn't send us to church, they took us to church. And they didn't send us to Sunday school, they went too. There's a big difference there. So Roy, what did you want to say?
Well, Mark Twain put it like, when he was in high school, he couldn't understand how stupid his parents were. But then when he got to be like 21 years old, he was amazed how much they learned in 4 years.
Right. Exactly. At some point, the light you hope will come on, right? And you will be jarred into reality, right? And see, I think all of these things that we talk about and the truth and the lies and all that stuff is fine. But it's really, a lot of it is because we live in a society that has been given so much. And so we're not desperate for our daily necessities, right? I can afford to buy groceries and not worry about how much it costs, really. Or go out and eat whenever I want to, or if my car needs to be repaired, I can get it repaired, and it's not a big deal, or what, that kind of stuff. If we were struggling every day for everything that we had, I think there would be a lot more consensus on what is right and what is wrong, right? Or if you were afraid for your life every day, there would be a lot more consensus on what's right and what's wrong. We really have no difficulties, not like the previous generations in our society have faced, I'm not worried about somebody invading Georgetown, Texas tomorrow. At least not anybody in an army, but anyways. So, objective truth stands on its own. Belief is not required, right? Objective truth is true, and there's no arguing it. The sun is the center of our solar system. 2 + 2 = 4. There is no such thing as a round square or a square circle, right? Those things are objectively true. There is no discussion required. They are always going to be true. Christianity is not a private belief. It cannot be described correctly. Oh, heck, we're over time. Okay. I'm supposed to be elder at the second service, and here we are. All right. So that concludes today's lesson. We got through pretty much all of it. Did I speak slowly enough? Could you understand me? Okay, I'm trying. It's not easy. Just ask my kids. So, all right, so let's have prayer and we'll go down to worship. Next week is human.
Chad,
the definition of human.
Interrupt
Yes.
you just a reminder, this class is recorded. Last week's was recorded, so if you missed and you want to go back and watch it, I think YouTube, all the places where you can watch Zion's sermons, you can also watch the Sanctuary Bible class. So if you're going to miss one, you can catch up through that. And one other thing I want to say is all of us as Christians need to spend some time thinking about how you would argue for absolute truth with somebody who doesn't believe that.
Right.
How
and
do you
our-
go about you can't define evil if you cannot define truth. And so, anyway, just something to think about this week is how we would go about defining what absolute truth is.
And it's not easy, always. It is easy, but it's not easy to convince others of what it is. So let's have prayer, and we will go down to worship. Lord God, once again, thank you for all that you do for us. We pray now that as we go into worship, that you'd be with the service, and we pray that you would go with us as we go back to our homes and we go back to our vocation throughout the week, that we would live as Christians should live. We ask these things in your name. Amen.